Asasadaya drichaya Tasmin Mahabhagavato Dvaipayana Suritsaka Lokan Anucharan Siddha Asasadaya drichaya Tasmin Mahabhagavato Dvaipayana Suritsaka Lokan Anucharan Siddha Asasadaya drichaya. Mataji's, please. Tasmin Mahabhagavato Dvaipayana Suritsaka Lokan Anucharan Siddha Asasadharya drichaya Tasmin Mahabhagavato Dvaipayana Suritsaka Lokan Anucharan Siddha Asasadhaya drichaya. Repeatedly, please. Tasmin, then, Mahabhagavataha, a great devotee of the Lord. Dvaipayana, of Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa. Surahit, a well-wisher. Saka, a friend. Lokan, the three worlds. Anucharan, traveling. Siddhe, in that ashram. Asasada, arrived. Yadrichaya, by his own perfect accord. Translation and divine purport by His Divine Grace, Abhay Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. At that time, after traveling in many parts of the world, Maitreya, a great devotee of the Lord and a friend and well-wisher of the great sage Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas, reached that spot out of his own perfect accord. Purport. Maitreya was one of the disciples of Maharishi Parasharama, the father of Vyasadeva. Thus, Vyasadeva and Maitreya were friends and mutual well-wishers. By some fortunate accident, Maitreya reached the place where Lord Sri Krishna was resting. To meet the Lord is not an ordinary incident. Maitreya was a great sage and a learned scholar philosopher, but not a pure devotee of the Lord. And therefore his meeting with the Lord at that time may have been due to some agyata sukriti, or some unknown devotional service. Pure devotees always engage in pure devotional activities, and therefore their meeting with the Lord is natural. But when those who are not up to that standard meet the Lord, it is due to the unforeseen fortune of accidental devotional service. Om Agyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kampatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Bhatitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Thank you so much, dear devotees, for attending this Srimad Bhagavatam class. We have the great opportunity to discuss the meeting of Krishna with his devotees. We've also got a description of Vyasadeva. So who is Vyasadeva? Why is he so special? What has he performed in terms of devotional service? And also we'll discuss the meeting of Krishna with inhabitants of the Vrajavasis, or Krishna and Balaram meet the residents of Vrindavan, which is explained very lovingly in the Krishna book, volume 2, chapter 27. And then finally we'll have a brief discussion on the ways of meeting Krishna, which is coming from the Nectar of Devotion, chapter 39. And we'll also describe why Krishna wears a peacock feather in his hair. So essentially in this chapter it's discussing about the meeting of Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas. And so you might ask yourself, who is Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas? So his name is a bit of a giveaway as to who he is, because Dvaipayana means island. So he was born on an island. We know Navadvip to be 9 islands, so Dvaipayana is island. He was born on an island. And so he was born in a very amazing situation. As is explained here, his father was Parasharama, who was thrown in a river. And so when he was swimming in this river that he was thrown into, he looked up into the constellations, into the stars, and saw it was a very opportune time to beget a child. So in astrology there is opportune times and there's inopportune times. And so this was the most opportune time to have a very glorified son. And so Parasharama begot a child in the womb of Satyavati. And so then Vyasadeva was born on an island. So Vyasadeva, in terms of genealogy, he also had some wonderful children as well. His eldest son was Pandu, and then Dhritarashtra, Vidura, and finally Shukadev Goswami. So Vyasadeva is a very amazing devotee. However, he's explained as a Mahabhagavat. So even Mahabhagavats can fall down from their devotional service. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Prabhupada writes about if the Mahabhagavats, even if they read the Sharidakya Bhashya commentaries on the Srimad Bhagavatam by the impersonalist Mayavadis, they can fall down. So it's very pertinent for us to not read the improper literatures because there can be fall downs as a result of that. And so the qualities of the Mahabhagavat, he sees Krishna in everyone, in everything and everywhere. So it's important not to imitate the Mahabhagavat devotees of the Lord and say, okay, I'm rendering service to this person because I see Krishna in their heart, because if we're not on that level, we can fall down and become degraded. So it's important to understand our level where we're at and not to imitate the level of the Mahabhagavats. So Vyasadeva was a very amazing in terms of his compilation. So Krishna explains, Vedanta krit Vedavid eva chaham. So I'm the compiler of the Vedas. So the Vedas exist eternally. They're knowledge that exists eternally. And so Vyasadeva performed the role of compiling the Vedas. Because at the end of every Dwapara Yuga, the Vedas become disorganized. And we can see how detrimental this might be, because if the Vedas are disorganized, you might fall into misinterpreting the actual literature. Because it's explained that if you go to some parts of Bengal, they say, oh, surrender to Krishna, you will be destroyed. Rather than surrender to Krishna, you will be delivered from all impious reactions. So a lot of Bengal, they propagate this disorderly Vedas. And so that was Vyasadeva's role, to organize all the Vedas and compile the Vedas. And so we're incredibly fortunate to be having read the ordered version of the Vedas, which surrender to Krishna means deliverance from impious reactions, and so therefore we can be free from any fear at all. So Vyasadeva is important as well because he spoke the Vedas to Shukadev Goswami in the womb. So Shukadev Goswami in the womb heard the Srimad Bhagavatam, and we might think ourselves to be great scholars and, okay, I can learn 30 shlokas, or the best pundit in the whole of ISKCON might be able to learn 150 shlokas. However, Shukadev Goswami, it's a reminder of us, the loss of intelligence of Kali Yuga. Shukadev Goswami, even in the womb of his mother, could recite the 18,000 verses of the Bhagavatam. And there's also, if you go to Brahmaloka, their Bhagavatam there has over 1 billion verses. So Shukadev Goswami was very highly realized, and he actually knew the Vedas even to a greater extent than Vyasadeva, his own father, which is demonstrated when Shukadev Goswami, he was enticed out of the womb at the age of 16 by Vyasadeva, and Shukadev Goswami's original response was, no, you're an attached householder there, so I don't trust you, so I'm staying here in the comforts of the womb. So it took Krishna personally to speak to Shukadev Goswami to get him out of the womb, and therefore he could he surrendered to Krishna, and then he got out of the womb of his mother at the age of 16. But he didn't hang around. He knew that Krishna was a householder as well, and he was perfectly realized in the Vedic literature, so he ran for it. Shukadev Goswami ran, and Vyasadeva chased after him. And there's a beautiful scene where then Shukadev Goswami comes across the gopis of Vrindavan who are taking bath, and they're not dressed at all. And so then Shukadev Goswami, being Naishtika Brahmachari, never having ever had any thoughts of woman or illicit sex or anything at all, he saw the gopis, and then they were completely undisturbed by the presence of Shukadev Goswami. That's why he's listed as one of the Mahajans. And so, however, then when Vyasadeva was running after Shukadev Goswami, Vyasadeva did disturb the mind of the gopis because, yes, he's Mahabhagavat, but he can fall down. So therefore, the gopis covered themselves up in the presence of Vyasadeva. So as the situation of Vyasadeva continues, you understand that one of our authorities in understanding the Vedic literature is Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu. And he lived at Govardhan Hill, and he studied Sanskrit, and he actually said there's 4 Vedas. So the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Atharva Veda, and the Sama Veda. And then some people say that the Mahabharata is the 5th Veda. However, Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu said that's an affectionate term, and we shouldn't interpret that literally. It's more of a figurative expression, and it's based on the fact that Vyasadeva wrote the 5th Veda, the Mahabharata, for the less intelligent, the Sudras, and those most unfortunate who couldn't understand the higher literatures. But all the purports of the Vedic understanding is there within the Mahabharata. You'll understand ethics, morality. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so Vyasadeva, he engaged in the service of writing down the Bhagavatam one very special personality, and that's Ganesh. So Ganesh was engaged by Vyasadeva to write down all of the Vedic literatures, and Vyasadeva's instruction to Ganesh was, if ever anything is not understood or you don't understand, let's just have a break and we can have a discussion. So often Vyasadeva played the trick of making a really complex text, and then so Ganesh said, I can't write that down, so okay, I can have a break. Thanks. So Vyasadeva had that relationship with Ganesh. So Vyasadeva, he compiled the Vedas, he put it in a reasonable format that we can understand. And there's a very beautiful pastime where a scholar approached Srila Prabhupada and asked Srila Prabhupada, you know, I've read about Vyasa and he's the literary incarnation of the Lord, so are you an incarnation of Vyasadeva? And then Srila Prabhupada's response was yes, because otherwise how would there be so many books? So that's why at every Vyasa Puja we offer our Guru offering, as well as the original Guru, Vyasadeva, we give a wonderful offering to him. So Vyasadeva is the literary incarnation of the Lord, and he compiled all these. So that's a wonderful reason why Maitreya was a good friend of Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas. And so it's explained here that Maitreya performed Agyata Sukriti. So unknown devotional service, therefore putting him in a position whereby he could meet with Krishna, which is not an ordinary thing, and it's not an easy thing. We see Markandeya Rishi trying to catch Krishna. He was meditating on the lotus feet of Krishna. He's trying to catch Krishna, and it's not easy to meet with Krishna. And we should find ourselves incredibly fortunate that in this age of Kali, that Krishna is manifested as the sound vibration. So Kali Kale Rupa Krishna Avatar. So in this age of Kali, Krishna is the sound vibration. So when we're chanting the holy names of Krishna, when we're speaking about Krishna, when we're hearing about Krishna, Krishna has personally manifested in this sound vibration. So it's a very beautiful passage, understanding accidental devotional service. And I remember I inquired originally from Korma Prabhu when we were on Harinam, and he was saying that it's all agyata sukriti. Even when we go out on Harinam and some people hear the holy names, they're unknowingly performing devotional service. They're unknowingly hearing the chanting of the holy names, hopefully joining in with the devotees and chanting. And also that Korma had this practice of always lighting incense sticks. So he offered that incense sticks to his Shalagram Shila, and then people would walk past, even if they smelt the fragrance of the incense, they're unknowingly performing devotional service. So Srila Prabhupada explains there are a number of ways of meeting with Krishna. So this is very beautifully explained in the Nectar of Devotion, chapter 39. And Prabhupada explains that meeting with Krishna is actually yoga. So yoga is the connecting or meeting with Krishna. Then meetings with Krishna can be classified into three classes. There's perfection, satisfaction, and steadiness. So it's very beautiful. We understand Bilva Mangala Thakur to be a very highly empowered devotee of Krishna. And in his Krishna Kanamrita, he describes how Krishna meets with his devotees. So Krishna meets with a peacock feather in his hair, a Marakata jewels on his chest, with restless eyes, a beautiful smile, and his delicate body. Because in the Nectar of Devotion it's further explained that Krishna's body is so delicate that even if a leaf falls from the tree and lands on Krishna's body, it leaves a bruise or an impression. So Krishna's body is very delicate, and that's how he meets with every one of his devotees. He knows how to dress up, he knows how to make the devotees feel special with a beautiful smile on his face. And then I'm further reminded of Rupa Goswami that Krishna smiles when humorous talks are engaged in. So when devotees are talking humorously about Krishna and his pastimes, then a smile appears on Krishna's face. So an explanation of when the meeting is perfection is from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 38, Text 31. And it explains Akrura's meeting with Krishna. So Akrura is one of the elder members of the Yadu dynasty, and he was given the task by King Kamsa to go to Krishna Balaram in Vrindavan and invite them to a wrestling match, which they thought they would be spectators in this wrestling match. However, so Kamsa had other designs. He had designs of actually killing Krishna and Balaram in this wrestling arena, but then Krishna obviously overpowered Kamsa. So this is a perfectional meeting when Akrura, he knew that he was a devotee of Krishna and Balaram, so he had this beautiful chariot, he had beautiful horses. The horses were explained, they were moving like waves in the ocean towards Krishna. And so when Akrura met Krishna and Balaram, being an elderly member, he paid obeisances to Krishna and Balaram, and he showed them the love and adoration and respect that they deserved. So this great eagerness means in the perfection meeting. And then there's other types of meetings with Krishna, one of which is satisfaction. So essentially, Krishna had servants in Goloka Vrindavan. One of them was Daruka. And so his service was to stand outside Krishna's door and basically guard Krishna's door in Vrindavan. And so he demonstrated steadiness in his devotional service by sometimes he would pay obeisances and fold his palms. And then Daruka, because of the familiarity and the regularity and the stability, he didn't pay obeisances to Krishna. But Krishna knew it was all Servatorship. He didn't take it as an offense or anything like that. And then in chapter 39, Srila Prabhupada explains what is Servatorship. So Servatorship means waiting to receive the orders from Krishna. So, and Servatorship is actually the beginning of yoga realization. So when we understand Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and our role as jivas is eternal servitorship, then that's beginning our yoga realization. And you see that some devotees are so eager to serve Krishna that they're prepared to wait in the temple, and then hopefully someone will come along, Prabhu, can you help out with this? Or Mataji, can you help out with this? And so this is the waiting to receive orders from Krishna. So then finally, the satisfaction. So when Krishna, he goes away at times. So he leaves Vrindavan. We also know that Krishna is Vrindavan Parityaja Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja. So he never leaves Vrindavan, but for the purpose of pastimes and Leela, he leaves Vrindavan at times. And so this long separation that occurs between the times that Krishna meets with the gopis again is an example of the meeting in satisfaction. So Krishna is, we're reminded that the process of surrender to Krishna includes 6 items. So one of them is to accept that which is favorable to Krishna consciousness, reject that which is unfavorable to Krishna consciousness, believe in Krishna's protection, identify with Krishna's devotees, feel inability without Krishna, and always think oneself inferior to Krishna. So I was reading or hearing a beautiful class by His Holiness Indradyumna Swami, and then so we hear Bilvamangala Thakur glorifying Krishna and explaining that he has a peacock feather in his hair. So you might ask yourself, why does Krishna wear a peacock feather in his hair? And it's a very beautiful question, and that's explained in a number of different ways. Firstly, by Rupa Goswami in his Ujjvala Nilamani, in chapter 10, text 39, he explains the beautiful story of after taking a sumptuous prasadam feast, because often Krishna and Balaram would all have picnics. They would all sit down and take prasadam, much to their joy. And the cowherd boys, they had so much love for Krishna that if they were tasting something so delicious, they would even take it out of their own mouths and put it into Krishna's mouths. Such was their desire to have Krishna enjoy the prasadam, or the mercy. So there's a very beautiful story where Krishna is, after taking this sumptuous prasadam, they all decide to sit underneath this big shadowy banyan tree and decide to take rest. So all the cows and all the cowherd boyfriends of Krishna are laying underneath this tree, and then Krishna wakes up. He's ready to play with his friends again, and so he decides to play his flute. And so the flute wasn't enough to wake up the cowherd boys. They'd have so much prasadam, eaten so much rasgula, rasmalai, that they were still, sleeping. So, however, the flute did manage to wake up the peacocks. So as soon as Krishna played on his flute, the peacocks started dancing and they started singing, and they really enjoyed the association of Krishna. And we're reminded by Rupa Goswami. Actually, it's Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami in his Govinda Lilamrita, and just a tiny little drop from there, it's explained that all the birds of Vrindavan are actually great sages, and they're actually eternally perfected souls. Just for the purpose of rendering devotional service to Krishna, they manifest in a form such as a bird, and Krishna enjoys the singing, Krishna enjoys the dancing of the birds, and there's so many beautiful explanations of the birds being highly enlightened sages or eternally perfected souls. So Krishna approaches these peacocks, and the head peacock puts his head on Krishna's feet and pays obeisances, touches Krishna's feet with his head, and then stands up and he says to Krishna, "Krishna, will you please dance for us?" And then Krishna, being Bhakta Vatsala, or one who responds to his devotees' requests, he starts dancing. And so an ordinary person might dance for, 1 hour, 2 hours. Krishna decides to dance for a whole day of Lord Brahma for the peacocks. So it's a very long dance. And so Krishna danced for the peacock, and immediately upon Krishna dancing, some of the peacocks just faint in ecstasy. They fall over fainting, and they're in so much ecstasy having danced with Krishna. And then other peacocks, they dance for as long as they can, then they become exhausted and just watch their feast of their eyes. Is just amazing to see Krishna dancing for so long. And I'm reminded at this point that the gopis cursed Lord Brahma for having eyes that blink, that momentarily impede their vision of Krishna. So the peacocks were watching in this mood of total awe and reverence and love and adoration towards Krishna for his dancing for so long. And so, as a result, after Krishna stopped dancing, as a way of showing their loving reciprocation, the peacocks realized, okay, we have to give something tangible to Krishna. You know, we've adored him with our eyes, we've heard his beautiful singing, we've heard his beautiful flute playing, we've seen him dance for so long, we have to give him something tangible. And so then the head peacock takes one of the peacock's feathers off his own back and gives this to Krishna and says, please adorn yourself with this. And then so Krishna reciprocates and he places the peacock feather in his head. And so Purnamasi gives a beautiful explanation of the peacock feather in Krishna's head. And he says, to the peacock, Purnamasi says, to the peacocks it appears like a glistening rain cloud is dancing before them with a beautiful peacock feather in his head. So this is the vision of the peacocks seeing, and they have pure bhakti, they have premanjana. They see with pure love of Krishna, therefore they can see him in his sham form and they can see the beautiful Krishna feather. So that's one explanation from Ujjvala Nilamani explaining why Krishna wears the peacock feather. And there's also another explanation. If we look at, there's a beautiful devotee by the name of Ramakrishna Das, and he appeared many years after Lord Chaitanya left to go back home to his eternal residence, and he explained, Ramakrishna Das wrote a commentary on the Srimad Bhagavatam, and the commentary that Ramakrishna Das wrote was called Prema Manjari, and then it's explained in Canto 10, Chapter 21, Text 5 of the Prema Manjari commentary of Ramakrishna Das, why Krishna wears the peacock feather. And then he so beautifully writes that in the sacred kunj of Srimati Radharani, there are many peacock feathers dancing. And as a result of that, their peacock feathers fall off. And so Radharani's eye color is the same as the plume on the feather of the peacock. So Krishna wears the peacock feather such that he can get the merciful sidelong glance of Srimati Radharani. And so the devotees in Vrindavan, they recite a very beautiful prayer, Radha Kripa Kataksh. So it goes, Kripa, Radha Kripa Kataksha. How does it go? Kada karishasi hamam kripa kataksha bhajanam. So all of us as devotees of Sri Radha and Krishna are praying for the merciful sidelong glance of Srimati Radharani. And indeed Krishna himself is personally playing that same role as desiring the merciful sidelong glance of Srimati Radharani. And that's the reason quoted by Ramakrishna Das as the reason for Krishna having the peacock feather in his hair. So meeting with Krishna is a very amazing, fortunate situation. And there's no other more fortunate situation described in the Krishna book, Volume 2, Chapter 27, as the meeting of Krishna and Balaram with the inhabitants of Vrindavan. So we know there was a solar eclipse occurring. So whenever a solar eclipse occurs, devotees can gather together and say, this is a perfect time for further increasing our hearing and chanting of the holy names of the Lord. We can go on Harinam, we can do book distribution, we can do prasada distribution, because a solar eclipse is occurring and it's very auspicious for Krishna. So on this particular solar eclipse, one massive rain cloud covered in front of the sun, and tremendous amount of rain fell. So much so that it's explained that there's 7 hellish planets and there's 7 heavenly planets. So right up to Svarga Loka was covered with the rainfall falling from this big rain cloud. And so it was a tremendously auspicious occasion. So what do the devotees do on auspicious occasions? They like to travel on pilgrimage. So these devotees, they travel to Kurukshetra. And Kurukshetra, we know, Dharmakshetra, Kurukshetra, it's a very auspicious place for the performance of yagyas. And they went to a particular place in Kurukshetra called Samanta Pankaja. And I'm reminded at this point in time where our spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, explained that actually one can perfect their bhajan in Kurukshetra. So rather than going to Vrindavan, even in the time of Bhaktisiddhanta, Vrindavan was overwhelmed by so many people who weren't so interested in Krishna Bhakti and interested in something else. And so Bhaktisiddhanta advised his disciples to go to Kurukshetra and perfect bhajan. And so there was a wonderful incarnation of Krishna called Lord Parasharama. And so Lord Parasharama, we know with the advent of impiety that we have kings in this world who are impious. So in order to rid the world of these impious kings, sometimes Krishna personally comes down to this material world. It's explained that to protect the devotees and annihilate the miscreants, I personally come down to this material world. So Lord Parasharama comes down to Samantapankaja and he kills the Kshatriyas 21 times over. So what happened, the Kshatriyas were there, and then Lord Parasharama killed the entirety of the Kshatriyas on the world, and then as a result, then there were more Kshatriyas trained, so 21 times over, Lord Parasharama personally killed all the Kshatriyas. So, and what happened was, there was so much blood as a result that Lord Parasharama had to excavate 5 kunds in Samantapankaja and filled all these kunds with the blood of the soldiers. And it's interesting, even to this day, if you go, there's been archaeological societies to test this hypothesis, and they've dug down deep into the core of the earth, and they've found there is a layer of blood there of the soldiers who died in Kurukshetra under the hand of Lord Parasharama. But it's very important to realize that Lord Parasharama is on the level of Vishnu Tattva. So what that means is Krishna can perform these abominable acts even though he doesn't want to. So we heard about the punishment of the wrongdoer, and Krishna has to punish, that's his duty, even though he doesn't want to, so he manifests himself, and it's not to be imitated by the jivas. So none of us would perform these abominable acts or these heinous crimes against any other living entity, because we realize we're on the level of Jiva Tattva. So Lord Parasharama, he engaged in that, and he killed the soldiers 21 times over. So then with the heralding of this wonderful place, the time was right in terms of the solar eclipse. The place was right, being Kurukshetra. And the circumstances were right because Krishna and Balaram were personally going to be there to meet all the devotees of not only Dwarka, but also the Vrindavan Vasis were invited as well. So all the important people visited, however some people remained to protect Dwarka. So you saw the elderly members like Akrura, Ugrasena and Vasudev invited, and they took darshan of Krishna. As well as you saw some of the younger members like Pradyumna, Usha, and many others. However, there were some devotees who stayed behind, like Kritavarma, the commander-chief of the Yadu dynasty, as well as the son of Pradyumna, Aniruddha. And then you had Shuka and Sharana, so many devotees staying back to protect Dwarka. So the custom in that time was, when some of the residents left a kingdom, opposing kingdoms took that as a time whereby you could launch an attack on that neighboring kingdom and then, perhaps steal some things or cause some destruction. So then some of these devotees were left behind to protect the residents of Dwarka. And then so we move into understanding the beauty of the Yadu dynasty. So when the time is right, the solar eclipse was there, they were meeting Krishna and Balaram, it was a very auspicious place. It's explained that the Yadu dynasty, their beauty and their personalities increased hundreds and hundreds of times as a result of being there in that wonderful situation. So the residents of the Yadu dynasty got a head start on the Vrijvasis because Dwarka is closer to Kurukshetra than Vrindavan. So the Yadu dynasty had rise there first. And what did they do when they first get to Kurukshetra? They took bath. So Snan Yoga is a very important part of Krishna consciousness. And sometimes we're fortunate enough when great devotees like Mahavishnu comes to Sydney, and one of his favourite pastimes is to take bath. And so he takes bath in the Bondi Beach or Coogee Beach. And some of the devotees had the great opportunity to take bath with these great personalities. And indeed, even even in Srila Prabhupada's time, the devotees had the opportunity to take bath with Srila Prabhupada, where he got down to his loincloth, and then he went into Prabhupada Ghat in Mayapur, took bath. There's beautiful footage there of Prabhupada taking bath in Mayapur. And there's another pastime where Madhudvisa explains, where all the senior men were taking bath with Srila Prabhupada, and then what happened was they started becoming a little bit too familiar with Prabhupada, so they splashed Prabhupada with water, at which point Prabhupada's eyes filled with tears. He left and he ran away, and then Madhudvisa ran after him and said, Prabhupada, is everything all right? And Prabhupada said, I'm not fit to lead this movement. And then so Madhudvisa realized that Prabhupada wanted to be left alone because of the slight of becoming too familiar with the Guru. So bathing in Krishna consciousness is very important. A lot of devotees take bath regularly in Radhakund, highlighted by Raghunath Das Goswami, whose daily ritual was to take bath in the holy waters of Radhakund. So the beauty of the Yadu dynasty was enhanced as a result of their being in the right time, place and circumstance, and they arrived there with golden necklaces and beautiful flower garlands and beautiful clothes, and it's explained that they arrived there seeming like arriving on the aeroplanes of the demigods. Such was the opulence of the chariots. And there was 3 methods by which they arrived there. Some of them arrived by horse and chariot. Then riding on the back of an elephant was another way. And the horse and chariot, the horses were explained as moving like the water, the water in the ocean. And then the elephants were explained like moving like the wind. And so they arrived there beautifully, and the women were carried on palanquins by men who had features that resembled those of the Vidyadharas. So it's a very celestial, very beautiful situation where they all arrived there. They took bath, and as a result of the solar eclipse, they observed fasting. So in the Krishna consciousness movement, we know that fasting is very much part of, we have the Ekadasi fasting, we have the Janmashtami fasting, and so this originally comes from the residents of the Yadu dynasty who would observe the fasting. And then so whilst they were fasting, they realized they had to engage in devotional service. And there were a lot of brahmanas who were very hungry as a result of the solar eclipse, the rain falling down, and so they fed the brahmanas very sumptuously. And Prabhupada gives the definition or the delineation between raw food as that food which is cooked in boiling water, vegetables, fruit salad, so things like chapatis, rice and vegetable preparations are considered raw if they're cooked in boiled water, whereas cooked food is that which is cooked in butter or ghee. So the brahmanas were fed very sumptuously with cooked food. So there was puris, kachoris, samosas, so many beautiful preparations, and so the brahmanas fed to their full sumptuous capacity. So then what happens after the brahmanas were fed? The yadus, they begged the brahmanas, have you taken your full quota? Would you mind if we take your remnants? And so the brahmanas gave blessings and said, yes, you can eat as well. And so the Yadu dynasty, they took the remnants, which is known as Mahaprasadam. So Mahaprasadam, or the Maha Mercy, is that which has directly been offered to Krishna, and then Mahaprasadam is the prasadam which is offered to the devotee of Krishna after Krishna has taken it. So the residents of the Yadu dynasty themselves ate so much, and then they went under the big shadowy trees and they took rest. And then they started receiving the guests. So as it's Vedic etiquette, you can invite people and then receive them as guests. So the Yadu dynasty played this role, and they received so many wonderful personalities. They received Bhishmadev, Vyasadeva, Akrura, Ugrasena, and then so many neighbouring provinces visited, so such as the Kuru province, the Matsya province, the Masinara province. So many provinces visited, and the Yadus received them very nicely, sometimes bathing their feet with water, and sometimes, offering them exchanges of love. And then the most beautiful part of this meeting with Krishna is when the residents of Vrindavan arrive. So you had the scene where Mother Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj is meeting with Rohini, and they're meeting with Vasudev. And so perhaps there's a very beautiful dialogue where Kunti is meeting after a long time because she was exiled under the cruel leadership of Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra. Kunti was exiled with the Pandavas to remain in the forest. So then now she has an opportunity to meet her brother Vasudeva. And so her response was, "Oh my dear brother, you are so perfect as a brother. None of my desires have been fulfilled. However, I'm disconsolate as a result of the fact that you didn't decide to inquire about my welfare at all. I understand that there's the will of providence moving people from distance to distance, but why didn't you inquire about my welfare?" And then she said, is it that the father, the brother, the sister completely forgets about the sister? And then so she inquires like that to Vasudeva. And then Vasudev's response was, please don't be sorry, and please don't blame me. It's just the atrocities of King Kamsa keeping us locked up. In actual fact, we've only been able to be free from Kamsa for the last 3 days, and so we've come straight here to inquire about your welfare. And it's true, the will of providence moves us from place to place, so we should understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, He's the Supreme Controller, and He's moving all the devotees according to His will. And then it's very beautifully explained as the explanation, or the way, the example given is like cotton and dust. So the cotton and dust is blown by the wind, and at times the cotton and the dust comes together and resides together, and then the wind decides to blow again, and then so the cotton and the dust is dispersed. So much like as we're jivas, we might be here present in this temple, and as Bhava Vibhushana wonderfully said, Govinda, or Ganasham Govinda Prabhu just has to say, okay, you guys have got to go to this village. So then as like dust and cotton, then some of the dust goes and then some of the cotton stays. So that's the way we're all moved under the guidance of the Supreme Controller. So Kunti Devi then embraced Vasudeva, and there's a beautiful scene when all the residents of Vrindavan start embracing. So culturally, what the women of Vrindavan do is they smear kumkum and turmeric on their breasts, and then they embrace. So then they leave that impression on the other woman of the turmeric and the kumkum. So there's so much heart-to-heart embracing, their hearts were throbbing, they hadn't seen Krishna for so long, they hadn't seen each other for so long, and finally this situation was a great opportunity for them all to meet. And then Rupa Goswami explains next about yukta vairagya, or perfect knowledge and realization. So perfect knowledge and realization is always thinking about Krishna, being renounced for Krishna, being knowledgeable for Krishna. So that's the perfection of yukta vairagya, or not dry renunciation for no purpose, or knowing things just to be an academic scholar. It's all about understanding Krishna and rendering service, much in the mood of the gopis, and so that we can understand that. So everyone was welcomed very beautifully, and then so what then happened was the Vraja gopis come. So the younger damsels of Vrindavan, they arrive on the scene, and they see Krishna in his Dwarka form. So he's surrounded by his 16,108 wives. So what the Vrindavan Vasis do, they decide to embrace Krishna in their heart and soul. They don't personally run to him because it wouldn't be etiquette to do that in that situation, because Krishna is surrounded by his 16,108 wives. So they stay, and in their minds and heart they embrace Krishna, they hug him, they show their love and adoration towards him, and then they feel the reciprocation. There's an emotional exchange, because it's explained in the later stages of bhakti that one can actually worship Krishna in one's mind. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains the process of Shraddha to Prema in his wonderful book, one of his wonderful books, and he says after the stage of ruchi, then one can worship Krishna in one's mind and then get the reciprocation. So it's a very advanced level to be on the platform of ruchi and to worship Krishna in one's mind. However, Prabhupada reminds us that the Archa Vigraha, or the deity form of the Lord, is personally Krishna present. So anyone rendering service to the Archa Vigraha is exchanging with Krishna in that loving relationship as well. So as a result, then it goes into the glorifying the Vedic hymns, the Ganges water, and the Srimad Bhagavatam. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is the chief of all literatures. And going back to Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa, it's explained that he compiled all of the Vedas. However, he still had this tremendous depression, and he was so lamenting, and he felt like he was performing a task not to the standard required, because even great pundits were reading the 4 Vedas, and as a result of it, they were reading it, and they were coming to the conclusion that the goal of life is sense gratification in the higher planetary systems by reading the 4 Vedas. So as a result of that, that wasn't Vyasadev's intended meaning. He wanted them to understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So arriving on the scene to dispel the depression of Krishna, Dvaipayana Vyas, is Narada Muni. And Narada Muni explains to Vyasadeva, you need to write the Srimad Bhagavatam, which glorifies the name, personality, pastimes, entourage of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So therefore the Srimad Bhagavatam is the highest of all literatures, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur explained that even if every other book in the whole of human creation was completely lost, and all we had left was the Srimad Bhagavatam, there would be no loss. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is in itself the most wonderful of all literatures, and Srila Prabhupada presented it to the less intelligent people of this age who don't have the ability to quote 18,000 shlokas like Shukadev Goswami to understand perfectly well that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Nanda Maharaj also attended, and there was a tremendous mitigation of suffering when Krishna and Balaram, when they eventually saw Krishna and Balaram. So it's explained that the Gopis' songs of lamentation are so beautifully presented by the devotees in the time of Kartik, and they sing about their separation, their feeling of separation from Krishna, and one moment feels like 100 million years or more, and so now this suffering is being mitigated upon meeting with Krishna and Balaram. And there's beautiful exchanges between Devaki, Rohini and Yashoda, and so essentially what happens next is Krishna decides to go to a secluded grove and then to meet with the gopis personally. So to fulfill, in their minds they embrace Krishna. Now in this secluded grove with Krishna they can actually embrace Krishna, reveal their minds to him, explain how much they love him and adore him and they miss him. And Krishna's response to them is really amazing, because he says, please forgive me. Under the order of the superior members, of the elderly members of my family, I had to go. I had to kill so many demons, I had to vanquish so many impious rulers, so please forgive me, I had to go. And I understand that your love and affection for me is worthy of reciprocation. So, and then he says, please don't see me as being ungrateful, the fact that I left. Please don't ever think that I'm ungrateful that I left Vrindavan. And so then he mitigates the suffering of the gopis, and they have this very beautiful exchange, and they reveal their minds, and then Krishna explains the whole, he even, in third person narrative, he says about the will of providence, that he's directing our movements, not us at all. So essentially this emotional exchange is highlighted by the Rathayatra Festival. So when Krishna, in his form as Jagannath, Baladev and Subhadra, leaves from Jagannath temple, then there's the return Rathayatra, which is symbolic of the gopis bringing Jagannath or Krishna back to Vrindavan. So it's a very emotional, transcendental process of bringing Krishna back to Vrindavan, and so every year the devotees worship this Rathayatra festival. So then we look at a lot of devotees meeting with Srila Prabhupada, because the whole, one of the themes of this text is the meeting. And so I picked up Jai Prabhupada, written by Bhakti Vikas Swami, and he was explaining that he only met Prabhupada very infrequently, because he joined the movement in 1976, which is towards the latter part of Srila Prabhupada's advent in this material world. And so he said he had very few exchanges. He went on morning walks, he listened in the class, but as a result of his, junior relationship, he knew that when Prabhupada was giving class, he would just sit at the back, not ask so many questions. So, however, he felt consoled by the fact that Prabhupada explained that he's always there in his books. However, there are other devotees who had more advanced meetings with Srila Prabhupada, which is highlighted by Radhanath Swami in the Cross Maidan Festival, where he met Srila Prabhupada for the first time, and in actual fact the story of Radhanath Swami meeting with Srila Prabhupada became a New York Times bestseller in My Journey Home. This beautiful story of understanding how he had a dream that he was to go to Vrindavan, and he was staying with his friend, and then he went to his friend and said, I've had this amazing dream. You know, God personally came in my dream and he told me where I should go. And his friend said, me too, I've had the same dream. I've told you, God appeared in my dream overnight and he's told me exactly where to go. And then so they said to each other, okay, where did your God tell you to go? We'll say the same thing after 3. 3, 2, 1. Radhanath Swami said India, and the other man said Israel. So they realized at that point in time, that was the beginning of them separating and their friendship. They met later on in life, but it was so a lot of people had the great fortune of meeting Srila Prabhupada, and it's explained that Srila Prabhupada gave the instruction to Jamuna, I want you to go out onto the street and speak to the most wealthy man you can see and ask him for a donation for the Cross Maidan Festival. And indeed Jamuna followed that instruction, and this man, the wealthiest man she could see, gave a donation big enough to sponsor almost the entirety of the Cross Maidan Festival, whereas so many people became devotees. The Radhanath Swami was living in a Buddhist ashram, practicing not speaking or anything like that, and then he came in the association of the devotees. There's a beautiful story right at the culmination of My Journey Home where Radhanath Swami is sitting in the crowd chanting Hare Krishna, Jamuna is leading the kirtan, and then Prabhupada sees him, because what the spiritual master does is he marks down the devotee. So it's explained that the spiritual master will see the devotee listening attentively or perhaps performing nice service, and then he will mark him down. So this is what Prabhupada did with Radhanath Swami. And then he was invited to come up on the stage and sing. And then Radhanath Swami gives a beautiful class in ISKCON Chapati. It goes for over an hour about his meeting with Prabhupada and his meeting with the devotees. So we're very fortunate to talk about the meeting with the devotees. Just by way of summary, what we've discussed today is the glorification of Vyasadeva, who he is. And also it's interesting because when we go to Chaitanya Bhagavat of Vrindavan Das Thakur, it's explained that Nityananda Prabhu was going on pilgrimage for 20 years. And then because Vyasadeva, he lives in Badrik Ashram, during Nityananda Prabhu's travels, he came across Vyasadeva in the Badrik Ashram. And so there's a very beautiful description by Vrindavan Das Thakur of Lord Nityananda coming into Vyasadeva, and Lord Nityananda pays obeisances to Vyasadeva, such is his desire to glorify such a wonderful personality. And then it's explained also that Vrindavan Das Thakur is actually an incarnation of Vyasadeva, and also Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, who writes so beautifully the Chaitanya Charitamrita, is also an incarnation of Vyasadeva. So we've discussed Lord Vyasadeva, we've had a brief description of Sukadeva Goswami as a Mahajan, we've discussed the ways of meeting Krishna, and finally we've discussed this beautiful situation where all the residents of Vrindavan and Dwarka meet with Krishna at Kurukshetra, at Samanta Pankaja. So does anyone have any questions or comments or answers? Yes, Mataji.
Thank you very much for the wonderful class again. I was just wondering, usually the plume when you spread up is taken as a negative connotation, like there's phrase like those who doesn't come and see the deity in their eyes like that. Yeah, but then here, like, the Ujjvala Vasindika, I guess?
Ujjvala Nilamani, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so it's referred to Radharani's eyes.
Yeah. So how to cope with the perhaps contradiction?
Yeah, I was just thinking if it's taken as a negative connotation here, like, if you don't see deities, those who don't, their eyes don't see the deities, their eyes is like that.
Yeah.
And then it says in that text that Radharani's eyes is that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry, maybe I didn't explain it perfectly well. Essentially, the plumes on the peacock feather are the same colours as Srimati Radharani's eyes. So essentially, Krishna wears it so that he can get the sidelong glance of Srimati Radharani. And I understand there are some negative connotations to the peacock feather, but once it touches Krishna's head, then it's completely pure. So it's explained even like with the cow, the front of the cow is considered muchi and the back of the cow is considered suchi, and every item of the cow is a worshipable deity. So in the same way, once any item of paraphernalia that Krishna has touched becomes an object of worship. In itself, you can take a peacock feather from Krishna's head and then you can perform arti to it, you can perform bhajans, because it's touched Krishna's head. Therefore, it removes all the inauspiciousness just as a result of the proximity to Krishna. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Thank you, sir. Yeah. It's a good point for sure, because it brings up ideas, why is Krishna wearing the peacock feather in his head? And so we've attempted to answer that today. So thank you so much for your attendance. All glories to Srimad Bhagavatam. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Srila Prabhupada ki. Srila Prabhupada ki.